me, sorry.
Hello there, you're very welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown, and a call here with you in the company of Joko James and Alan Morrison. We're coming at you a little bit later on in the week this week because, as you can see from my own Skype chat, that I'm not in my usual location, and neither is James. He is at a conference, and I am not in a conference. I'm sitting in the back of my soon-to-be home for the next 3 months as I try and prepare for my journeys across Europe over the next couple of months. Alan Morrison is in his actual place. So, Alan, how are you doing?
Yeah, fine. I'm comfortable. Thank you. Not been thrown out of any hotel rooms or had any traffic fines for trying to do podcasts.
No. You don't take these things into account sometimes when you're trying to record a podcast, but also get ready for a journey across Europe for 3 months. So I'm finding it difficult at the minute, but we're nearly there. So we'll get into the football. We are looking back at the derby from the weekend, the draw. We were looking to clinch the cinch, as the wording was phrased by myself, and I think the 20-minute Tims had the exact same thing as well. So it was there to be grabbed. It was a very obvious headline, so that's the one we went with. Unfortunately, Celtic did not clinch the cinch. It finished 1-1 at Celtic Park. The clinching hopefully will happen this weekend against Hearts, but we'll look back at the derby and the discussing points along the way as well. Alan, one thing that I want to throw to you here, because I didn't watch the game live, I had my own game at the same time, and I've only seen the extended highlight package of this game. Overall, it seemed to be a very negative attitude towards the performance, and the result was obviously not what we wanted. But one thing that I wondered was the performance as bad as people think it was, or was the performance bad or worse in people's heads because of what the game represented, because they were going for the title?
I hold on. I have to interject here. You just steamrolled over this. How did you do on Sunday?
Oh, we won. That's why that's actually
Wow.
that's one of the reasons why we're coming in late, because I was hungover for most of the week.
All right. Well, congratulations. This is the first time hearing that. Well done, sir.
Yeah.
What
was it you said? It was you played the Albion Ayeti role in this title.
Oh, big
success.
time, yeah. I celebrated that title as if I scored about 25 goals this year, and I had little to no importance into how this title went this year for my team. But
Brilliant.
We celebrate nonetheless. They all count. So
Excellent.
that's why I am busy this week, because I was pretty much hungover for most of it, celebrating my own league title. So it wasn't that I just pawned off the derby match. It was I had a very important game of my own, so that took precedent over the derby game. But as I said, it didn't seem like I missed much, Alan.
Well, obviously a game of huge importance, which, again, we tend to look back on these things and then apply a different context looking backwards than we did when we were looking forwards. And in terms of, feeling a bit deflated after the game, I think emotionally I felt the same. But again, you have to think of the context. Celtic went ahead and then got pegged back, so that's disappointing. And then probably they had their two best chances of the match in the last 5 minutes of the game. And that probably feels like, we got away with one there, in terms of that felt disappointing as well. So I think, that I think those, when you look at those moments and those situations, you feel, oh yeah, and Celtic probably got a little bit worse as the game went on. You probably then say, well, that was disappointing. But actually, again, if you watch the game back and try and sort of assess it with a more analytical head on, Celtic were pretty comfortable in that first half. After the first 5 minutes, it was almost as if the Rangers had come out with a full press, man to man, and then after about 5 minutes, I think they thought, right, have we done enough to show that we're trying? We're actually a bit tired now. We'll just kind of sit back a little bit and be a bit half-arsed about it. And they actually, both sides then proceeded to play poorly for most of the rest of the game. It's just that it manifests itself in different ways. And even the second half, if you actually break it down, there were moments of where they had like clusters of chances. There was a little bit of time, just after half time, when there was a couple of chances from corners, free headers, and there was another little flurry of those on around 70 odd minutes just after the goal. And then those two big chances at the end, for Sakala. But outside of those, it was just a mess of a game, just a really, really poor quality game. Celtic didn't do what they didn't play well. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Celtic played well. They didn't. I'm not even going to say, oh, they just did enough. But on the other hand, they didn't have to win the game. The other team did, and the other team didn't. And although they did have the better of the chances, they did shade the XG. Neither was a convincing performance from them. I mean, their press in the first half, especially, was all over the place, and they never looked like really scoring. They had one chance when Rolston fell asleep, and Kent stole a march on him. But outside of that, they had not a single real chance in that first half. So for a team that had to win the game, that wasn't great. But fair play, they came into it more second half. Celtic again. I thought when they made the substitutions, it looked like for 5 minutes that was going to be the deciding factor, because suddenly you'd brought some solidity and extra legs, and it looked like they'd taken off Jack and Aribo, and you sort of think, well, that's surely weakened their team, but actually it didn't transpire that way. And again, fair play to those individuals that came on; they did actually help revitalize their team as well. So. Yeah, just I think in summary for me, it was a poor quality game because Celtic were getting progressively worse the longer the game was going on. It felt a bit kind of meh at the end, but ultimately, that's 2 games in a row now in the league where they've had to win, they've had to beat Celtic, and they've taken 1 point out of 6. So, we have to be pleased about that, and it makes the league not a certainty because actually. I don't want to put any fear in people's minds, but 2 draws and a defeat, and we could actually lose it, which is not completely implausible, but it's probably unlikely, hopefully. So, we kept them at arm's length, basically, is the best I can say.
Yeah, and there's comments coming in on YouTube already, and if anybody's watching on YouTube and my internet starts to break up, I do apologize for that. I'm trying my best off a small internet Wi-Fi at the minute in a hotspot. James, you watched this from a different location as well at the weekend, but I guess one thing Alan touched on there was that it didn't seem that either side were overly happy with this. Out of 2 teams that are getting recognition in terms of the tactics that they deploy and have done through, like Rangers are in a European final now after this week as well. There are 2 sides that are set up well tactically, but this seemed like probably the worst derby of the year from both sides, really.
Yeah, I commented. I mean, I don't think any of the derbies since GVB came in have been all that well played by either team, particularly in the final third. I'd echo most of Alan's comments. I mean, I pretty much agree with everything that he said. What I took away from the game was I was hoping to see a change in some of the trends that we'd seen since the beginning of the year against them, and I don't think we really did in any kind of comprehensive way or significant way. I think they came in as Alan asked me last week what they might optimize for, and I think they made the right decision in optimizing for Thursday, and they've got the just rewards for that after playing pretty well yesterday. And for them to start Davis, Arfield is basically the number 10, who's he's not a pressing force. I mean, I think the fact that their press wasn't all that effective and the intensity of it dropped was reflective of Aribo playing striker, which hasn't happened that much, although he's a pretty athletic guy and a good pressing force. But behind him with Arfield and Davis, I mean, they're just not, they're not the same as Kamara in that kind of role. So, I thought given the circumstances, it's good that we got the result that we did. It kind of continues a lot of the analytical trends that we've seen the rest of the season. And I think we should celebrate that we've maintained the significant consistency in non-European level quality opponents that's allowed us to get in this position. Because ultimately, to me, that's the story of the season. The just really significant consistency against everyone but Rangers and European competition. And, that's a huge part of winning the league every season. And we've accomplished that. And that should be celebrated. But it doesn't change all these other things that are longer term. And, as Ange talked about this week, relative to the upcoming, hopefully, transfer window, relative to preparing for the Champions League, there's still work to be done. And I think that's reflected, and I think they understand that. And, hopefully it'll be focused upon in the coming months after we get to celebrate things, hopefully.
Yeah, the narrative today, especially on Celtic Twitter, I don't know if anybody's been following it, but it really has been discussing where Celtic stand after Rangers getting through to the Europa League final, now beating RB Leipzig to get to the final. Whether that means that Celtic have failed in European standards over the last couple of years, I think that's pretty obvious. I think that answers itself. Or do we look at it in the aspect of Celtic are 6 points ahead of a team that just made the Europa League final as well? So there's two ways of looking at it in that aspect. We might delve deeper into that later on in the show, but a lot of people, Mick Meneni is asking about Hatate. A couple of other people asking about Hatate as well, Alan. So I might throw that one to you. This wasn't the first derby match that Hatate seemed to struggle in. I find often this was something that I highlighted on my initial thoughts of Hatate when he first started with Celtic. A little bit headless at times, does live in his own world at times in terms of his movement, in terms of almost trying to do too much, chasing after too many balls and not maintaining shape in midfield. Shape in midfield is massive when it comes to these games. So how did Hatate play in terms of his numbers in general play and his output in this game?
No, I think you summarised it pretty well, actually. I mean, defensively, his output was next to negligible or virtually non-existent in actual fact, in terms of, of all the midfielders, lowest even number of recoveries, didn't win a single outright challenge or duel, if you like, and was packed quite a number of times, 15. Completed only 14 passes in the time that he was on the pitch, 70% pass success rate. That was really poor. He only completed four passes, which was actually one more than O'Reilly, but at least O'Reilly created a couple of chances. He did stick a couple of balls into the so-called danger zone, a couple of nice balls into the middle there. But other than that, really only one possession in the box, very little threat. And I think, I've been fairly consistent, I think, in writing about Hatate. The short period after he joined, I could sense that I didn't want to be I didn't want to be that guy, because he arrived and to such a fanfare, and I think people remembered the goal against Hearts and a great performance against Hibs, actually, a goal against Hearts, and then 2 goals in the derby.
2 goals against Rangers,
yeah. So to then come on and actually write, his underlying numbers are not that good. It would have probably come across a little bit churlish, but eventually, as time passed, that message had to be given. And it remains the case. So, as James rightly said, and we'll come on to in a bit more detail as this fascinating season unravels, all the things that are a problem for Celtic and that are a concern and that need addressing this summer, none of them have changed after the weekend's game. And in fact, a lot of the problems that we had read directly to the chances that they created. Mainly down the left-hand side of the defence, as I keep banging on about, and another feature which probably I've not discussed in the round so much is we just don't have yet that real blend in the middle of the park in terms of the number 8 positions. We've seen with O'Reilly and Rogic, you've got sort of almost too much similarity. Two players that are probably just the wrong side of wanting to play a 10 than an 8. And similarly with Turnbull and Rogic, how we got through 2/3 of the season with them both at number 8 will be one for some reflection, I think. So I think Hatate goes in there because he does give more of an overall midfield performance usually. But I think what we found, and I have found, especially in the semi-final, I suspect, was that Hatate and O'Reilly, they're still actually really young players. O'Reilly's never played more than League One football. Hatate, I know I keep mentioning this, but I know he's 23, but he's very inexperienced. He's a very inexperienced 23-year-old. He's come through the Japanese university system. He didn't really start playing professional football till he was about 21. And of all the games he played in Japan, he didn't play all of them in central midfield. He played quite a lot at left back and in other positions. So he's a relatively inexperienced central midfielder playing in games of this import as is O'Reilly. And when you're up against seasoned professionals like Jack and Lundstrom and Arfield and Davis, these are whatever you might say about their relative merits. These are highly experienced, in many cases, international players. So that's something that we need to just accept. There's going to be a bit of a learning curve, and also we just don't have that balance yet of what that sort of perfect midfield could potentially look like. So that for me is a general theme, and for Hatate in particular, he does desperately look like someone in need of of sheltering a little bit. I think Abada got to that point in the season as well as a young player. You can't just play young players every single game, week in, week out. We saw some spectacular results, as we did with Hatate, but you have to treat them carefully. You can't rely on them. They'll go through dips in form. They'll go through dips in confidence, especially being so young. And they've not got the experience behind them to learn how to come out of those little dips in their own personal form, and as well as all the the cultural and social and settling in stuff that's going on there. So again, I'm not going to be too hard on Hatate. I still like the raw materials that are there, but we've got a very raw player there. So to ask him to come in and dictate a league deciding match, I think is a real tough ask with his level of experience.
Yeah, and a lot of this comes down to man management as well. And your point about the betting in periods, really important, because if you listen to ex-pros, not the top level ones, the ones that have moved around clubs, Hatate joined in January, was it? He joined. He may still be living out of his suitcase at this point. He may not be fully bedded into the city, have his whole life in order. And I think if you read his piece as well, that he was, he says he's physically and emotionally tired. James, I know Ange has built up this level of respect where people almost assume, if Ange says it is, then it is. And, he's earned that respect from Celtic fans. Is there an argument to be made that potentially here he does need to give Hatate a rest, because even in public, Hatate is saying that he's tired? So maybe it's time to pull him out of the firing line a little bit and bring in someone else.
Yeah, it's hard to know that as an outsider, obviously. I think there's been a pattern of behavior so far out of Ange that if there was going to be one area that I might be critical as an outsider, it's kind of that throwback tough guy streak, maybe call it kind of old school mentality, and I think that has contributed to some of the injury problems probably. The gutted out mentality like we saw with Kyogo that resulted in the long-term injury, that kind of thing. And I think, could I see that as being, rather than giving a young player a break, maybe say, suck it up, young man, and let's get pushed through it. And again, that's to a degree, that can be effective. And I guess it's a matter of the degree and the personality fit and that kind of thing. So again, as outsiders, no real clue as far as that. And again, all we can do is kind of measure and analyze the performance levels. And to Alan's point, they have not been up to snuff. And whether or not that's for all these very reasonable potential aspects or not, it is what it is. And I think, how to address that. I think the luxury we have now is that we're not facing European quality opponents the last 3 games. So the margin for error has expanded, particularly given the 6-point lead. So maybe there's a broader lesson here that's being tried to be applied to the player, or trying to get him to, because again, these guys are young, but brains aren't done developing until 25, right? The idea that these young guys are going to just be able to be flogged like they were earlier in the season and not have potential, let's call it volatility of the psyche, the emotional part of this. As Alan said, it's completely normal for people of that age group to struggle at times, and particularly if they're just the level of workload and the intensity. That's tough for anybody, let alone someone who's 21, 22, 23. So yeah, I think that the break will be good for all involved, and if we qualify for Champions League, that'll be an even more normal break than we've probably had in a long, long time. So hopefully everyone gets a fresh start come, I don't know, maybe early July this year for a change when everyone reports back. And, we can analytically get a fresh start with some of these players as well.
Mm.
I'm just going to add, O'Reilly's only completed 190 minutes for Celtic, right? And now there's one that's 88 and one that's 89, a couple of 89s are close, but actually all those were in his first 5 or 6 appearances, and he hasn't actually completed more than 79 minutes in his last 13 appearances. So, he's obviously adjusting to the increased physicality and intensity, even compared to people might think League One in England is tough and competitive, and it is, but Scottish football is actually considerably quicker, despite what some pundits might tell you. And he's taking naturally some time to adjust to that. So I think that's important context before being too critical on the midfield, especially.
Well, while we're on the subject of O'Reilly, because he was actually going to be my next question, Alan, the last 2 derbies was the narrative going into them was Rogic versus O'Reilly. Rogic got the nod, and then O'Reilly came on as a sub, and there was sort of an impact there. So if we compare O'Reilly's 60 minutes to, say, Rogic's 60 minutes in the previous derby, was it worth the change? Did it make a difference to the team in the first 60 odd minutes while he was on the pitch?
Yeah, again, there's a lot of things that go unseen with O'Reilly. The little, as I've said before on here, the little foot in, the little bit of anticipation where he's just that little bit ahead of other players in his thinking. It's not the big glory crunching tackle. It's just nicking the ball from people. And 6 challenges he was successful in, which after Starfelt and McGregor was equal most in the team in the time that he was on the pitch. He won the ball back, a couple of times, lost it a couple of times, but generally that defensive work, I think, is going to be way better than Rogic. And I think I've said before that if you look at defensive action metrics, it's night and day as far as O'Reilly and Rogic are concerned, which you might not get from watching the game, but as I say, it's just the accumulation of little things that he does. He played 2 key passes, which was more than any other player. Not that many pack passes, I say, only the 3, which is one of the lowest on the team. And he didn't threaten the goal at all. So it was by no means a highly involved performance, but I think he does give that little bit more solidity in the midfield, which in a game where you're looking not to lose the game, or at least not to lose the game, I still think he was probably the smarter bet in that context.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing, in fairness to the midfield, was that we had serious problems in the back 5. So that was probably the worst part of the game for us, and that got worse as the game went on. So the midfield probably suffered as a result, meaning that the volume of pack passes and that kind of thing would have been down because the connection between back to middle to front was just not there on a lot of occasions. And I think a lot of that had to do with the beginning point of that connection.
Yeah. Well, playing 3 in midfield, it's always difficult playing against the setup that Rangers played against Celtic at the weekend. And anybody who's played midfield will know that it's if you're outnumbered in there, that it can be almost an impossible task, especially, and I mean especially, if your team are outnumbered in midfield and you have 2 wingers who are pressing up high, because if that first press is broken, then you're completely and utterly ruined in the midfield. You've almost got like a 7-3 outnumbered in the midfield if you play a high press and you get beaten with a press. So just moving forward to the Maeda, Jota, Kyogo 3, this was something that we were looking forward to going into the game. Is it something that we'll be continuing to look forward to over the next couple of weeks? Did it have moments of positivity rather than negativity?
Well, I suppose for me, Kyogo still looks a little bit short of the level of fitness and confidence that he would probably like. So his involvement was actually pretty minimal. He did a good job again in closing down, but he struggled to get on the ball. I think 5 passes he completed. He didn't create any chances. He had one one shot off target that was from way out on the left-hand side. So I think we just need to be cautious about expecting too much of him. And actually, looking back with hindsight, you could have made a case for Giakoumakis to start, but then again he's come back from a sort of a hamstring twinge as well. So again, probably you're being a little bit cautious on that front. I think Maeda did okay. I mean, he obviously set up the goal again. The work rate, the number of pressures. I mean, it was interesting that this was a lot less of an intense Celtic performance than it had been at Ibrox. I think Maeda's pressing was almost half the volume that he put in at Ibrox, for example. On the ball, again as he set up the goal, that was really the highlight for him. He did have one big chance with a header, which was I don't know whether he was trying to be really clever and head it into the corner, or whether he was just he bottled it a little bit with McGregor hurtling towards him. I'm not quite sure. I actually had Jota as my man of the match because of his, again, he had one of those days where it was just sheer volume of output and relative to other players on the pitch. He was by far the most creative talent in terms of both shots and creativity. He's easily the best sort of overall packing score. Easily the best. Well, yeah, him and Maeda had good, more or less the same expected scoring contributions because of Maeda's big chance that he had, and obviously had an assist. But I think he obviously his ability to find space, get on the ball in the box. There weren't great numbers by Jota's standards, but there were good numbers in the context of the game, and easily the best within the Celtic team. So it wasn't a particularly coherent forward performance. There was lots of linkages and interplay at all. But I think again, Jota, which he hadn't done in perhaps the last derby, certainly he at least managed to get on the ball and he managed to influence the game to a larger degree than any other Celtic player on the day, I would say, from a forward attacking perspective.
And a heck of a finish.
Yeah, really good finish. Back post Barisic, they call him. So a really interesting question coming in from Steve Letford here. He says, completely agree with James, Ori, Hatate. Also, do you think Ange would have played the same team if we had been level or behind Rangers last week going into the game? So if you think about the questions over the starting lineup, you're thinking, does he go with Maeda? Does he go with Jota? Does he start Abada in this game after the last derby? Does Giakoumakis or Kyogo start this game? Is it O'Reilly or is it Rogic? Does Turnbull start this game? A lot of questions around the team selection as we had in our preview. So, James, what do you think on that? Do you think if we're not ahead by 6 points, does the same team start in that game? Do you still go out in the same manner that Celtic would have?
I think probably the one that I would think would be the most debatable there would be Rogic over O'Reilly, meaning that would he go back to kind of the trusted veteran who's played such an important role throughout the season, and as Alan rightly says, hasn't done anything to deserve to be dropped necessarily. So I think that probably is the biggest one. Outside of, I have a hard time, again, voiced my opinion last week on the difference between Giakoumakis and Kyogo, but again, I think Alan's point's the most important one, which is he's not up to full fitness probably, and coming off of an injury, so that probably tilts that one even beyond the analytical debate. And outside of that, your right back's going to be your right back given the injury to Juranovic, and pretty much with all due respect to your buddy, we're down to one guy at left back with Juranovic probably out. So there's just not a whole lot of options outside of that, probably. Outside of maybe Abada, as you said, that again, I suspect Maeda and Jota were lock-ons. So
yeah, we didn't get to see the change in formation that everyone wanted with Giakoumakis and Kyogo up front, unfortunately. But we might see it by the end of the season. Who knows? They might be the new Larsson Sutton. We don't know that yet, but who knows? I think we're putting a lot of weight on how good these guys are if we're putting them in the Larsson Sutton basket already at this point in time. So just as we start to wrap up this and look ahead to the weekend and on, the significance of this result, the significance of Rangers' result in midweek. I mean, I'm not going to say Celtic are going to blow this, but we're in squeaky bum time at this point.
Potentially. I mean, as I say, I think if we draw 2 and lose 1, then and they win all 3, then yeah, I think we're getting caught. So, but again, there's no evidence of a collapse in Celtic's form. If anything, we're standing up to the challenges in the league. Certainly. I mean, listen, it's possible for 2 things to be true at the same time, which might seem contradictory, right? So, if you look at all of the analytical models that have been used throughout the season, whether it's predicting the outcomes based on underlying data to project forward, or whether it's essentially doing a Monte Carlo simulation, rerunning the games based on the performance data that was produced in the games that were played. If you look at both of those methodologies, Celtic have been ahead in the league consistently all season, right? Mm-hmm. And that's models run by Rangers supporters, Celtic supporters, just people who model this sort of stuff, and I would say are well respected in their field. And it's been consistent, anything between sort of 6 and 12 points that Celtic have been winning the league all season, right? So it is, as I say, it is true to say that Celtic are the best team in Scotland, not because they're top of the league, but because all of the models, all the underlying performance data has suggested Celtic are the best team in Scotland all season as far as the SPFL is concerned. It is also true to say that the Rangers team have performed far better in Europe than Celtic have. That's self-evident. Although they have lost and drawn quite a few games on their run. I didn't realise, by the way, that Eintracht Frankfurt are unbeaten in the Europa League this season. They haven't lost a single tie, single individual match, which is quite surprising. But it doesn't matter. It's about getting through 2 ties. That's all that matters. And they've successfully done that. So, and Celtic's performances in Europe have been, I would say, naive's probably a little bit strong, but certainly, we didn't really adapt our style. I'm not saying we necessarily have to, but we have to be a lot better at what we do to beat teams like even Leverkusen and Betis, and teams like Dortmund and Leipzig are the equal of those sides that I've just mentioned. What we've seen is that we're up against an opponent who have a manager who's come in and is willing to adapt to every single game that he plays, and indeed adapt within games to change formation, to change approach, to change personnel. And so far it's been really successful in Europe, especially not so much in Scotland, because they've dropped points against teams that you would beat. So that's the story of the season so far, and that might seem contradictory, because I think people have got this kind of binary view that which says because we can beat Dortmund, we must be better than every team in Scotland because Dortmund are better than every team in Scotland, and that's just not how it's just not how life is. As the league has consistently shown all season, and I'm not talking about the league table again. I'm talking about the performance data. So there's no doubt if and when Celtic are champions, they absolutely deserve to be. But it's also the case that Celtic need to go a long way to improve to the standard that the Rangers are setting in Europe. That is also true as well. And that's the challenge. That's the challenge ahead.
Yeah. Well, the reality is that there's only a couple of games left in the season. Celtic play Hearts this weekend, coming up tomorrow, and if Rangers drop points and Celtic win, then Celtic are league champions. That's how it works. They're playing against Dundee United, and their results against Dundee United this year, Dundee won the first game, Rangers won the second game, and it was a draw for the third game. So, I mean, the record isn't amazing against Dundee United. So, hopefully, they do us a favor this weekend, and Celtic can take the pressure off until the end of the season, so that you don't have the anxiety of, are we going to wrap this up anytime soon? So, James, Hearts this weekend, a team that I always find Celtic fans always get very nervous for this game. But if you look at the actual numbers and the results of these games and the performances, Celtic have been by far and away the dominant team in this fixture.
Yeah, I think Hearts have they're probably not as good as their standing in the league table suggests. They've had some positive variance, shall we say, this season. Um, the amount of chances that they've conceded, given where they're at in the table, is actually more in line with like 6 to 9 in the table. So the defensively they have not been um, real great. Gordon's had a good shot stopping season, which has helped them. Although his other aspects have hurt them, so it kind of balances out. Still positive, but not as positive as some would make it out to be, probably. So yeah, they're a good enough team that we can't be complacent. And because Gordon is the type of keeper that can have one of those games where he stands on his head, again, we go back to the Sechrist conversation that we had before we played Dundee United last time, and we will have again here shortly again, which is when you have this paranoia about dropping points when you need every single point. You know, facing a keeper that is at least capable of putting on one of those performances always creates anxiety for me, and we're definitely facing one of those. I suspect we're going to get a lot of chances. They've had injuries. I don't know the latest greatest as far as what they have available in their back four, but they've had some chopping and changing there, playing some younger guys. Their midfield's not terribly athletic. So I just, it's back to like Ross County. If they come out and try to mimic and be like a mini Rangers, we shouldn't be short of creating chances. And then it's whether or not we can get them past Gordon. And, they'll be, they've got some pace. Janelli, Boyce is a decent finisher. They got Ellis. They got some size on set pieces. So, they'll be a threat to score at some point. So they'll have more threat than a Ross County did, most likely. But it's at home, should be comfortable. It's one of those games where, if we have some good finishing, I think we'll have enough chances that it could be a 3 or 4 goal kind of game, with the caveat that, we're going up against a keeper who might make that tough.
Yeah. I never like sitting on, a high horse about the way that Celtic play football, or the way that any team plays football, because, the best way to play football is the way that gets you results. But I often find myself, especially in teams like Hearts and Hibs and things like that. And I mean, Hibs actually did try to change it with Sean Maloney this year, and we saw how long that lasted. I don't like the style of football Hearts play, because they are better than what they play. They try to make the games dirty. They're not really, they play as if they're a Livingston, but that's not what Hearts are as a club. They are not a Livingston. They don't need to do what Livingston do. They're very old school, shall we say, Alan?
I think historically that might have been the case, but I would say, Enda, that not this season. In fact, Hearts have been one of the more ball on the deck teams this season. After Aberdeen had probably tried to play the most football after the top two, and Hearts are probably next up there. So they're
sorry. I should clarify with that. I should clarify against Celtic. I mean.
Right. Again, yeah. I mean, I think there's a difference between a wet Friday night and a tight, packed Tynecastle, and then a Saturday afternoon at Celtic Park. I think there's a big difference, and I think Hearts will always try and use that hostile environment. It's the same as the Rangers did in Europe. There is probably no more hostile football stadium in the world than Ibrox, frankly. So you make the most of it, don't you? You make the most of your advantages, and they probably play up to that a little bit. But I would say this season they've. As I say, they're actually third in the league for completed passes overall. So they're fourth after Aberdeen. So they have got to where they are playing football. But I do agree with James that if it hadn't been for Craig Gordon, they would potentially be right back in the pack again. He's made a huge difference individually. In fact, I can't think of an individual player that's made as big a difference in the league than Craig Gordon, to be honest. But in front of him, now I don't know what the latest injury situation is that they have, but potentially their 4 best defenders, which would be Smith, Kingsley, Suter, and Halkett, are all out. They didn't play in the last game, which I know they won, but potentially, they're missing the whole of their front, their sort of their first choice defenders. Now, Hearts have actually had a good season in terms of they've used relatively few players. If you look at the I don't have an index for sort of lineup consistency, but I would suspect they're probably the most consistent lineup in the whole league in terms of they've had a core of players that they've been able to pick pretty much game on game. But what's happening, of course, is a relatively small squad. This time of the season is when the injuries start to take their toll, and then you're relying on people coming in and doing a job. So is Moore as good as Halkett, for example? Is Sibic as good as Suter, sort of thing? So not to underestimate them, because they've actually where they've been really impressive, I think, is in the attacking third, because players like Barry Mackay, Liam Boyce, Sims have got some of the best expected goals, expected assist rates outside of the top 2. Really, really impressive. Really potent attacking lineup. In fact, the only surprise really has been that since Sims has come into the team, is that Boyce has played more of a slightly withdrawn role, and I don't think that really suits him. I think you get the best of him as an out and out striker, and consequently he's not scored many goals in the last sort of 15 games after getting to 10, probably quicker than anyone else in the league. Mackay's got 11 assists, but his expected scoring contribution is 0.45, which is superb, for a winger in a team that's not in the top 2. So I think credit to them in terms of, I think they have overperformed. I think Craig Gordon's been, probably, if you had to pinpoint one thing, it would be Craig Gordon and the fact that he had a very stable team in front of him. That's now gone because of injuries, I think. I don't know if any of those players will be back, but there's still danger there, absolutely. But to James's, I kind of agree with James. I think because of the pedestrian nature of their midfield, especially athletically, they're not great in midfield at all. And because they're missing such key defenders, I'm hopeful that Celtic will cause them a lot of problems. I mean, just to give you some indication, even though we've played them in games that they've had to win, in terms of it was actually nip and tuck for second place in some of the games we've played them. On expected goals, we've got over 12. And they're on 5, but we've just missed a lot of chances against them. Gordon's made some great saves.
Yeah, so this is, I always come back to my paranoid concern. Like, if I'm going to try and make an effort to get worried, if their back 4 are out, then we could be facing more of a St. Mirren in December type of situation, meaning that a team alters how they play because of the availability of players. And if they adopt more of a bunkering mentality, so this has been my concern, that somebody would do this that has decent players. So if they, because of the relative youth and or just lack of game time this season, and the people that end up comprising their defensive line, if they say, okay, we're just going to park the bus now, and basically rely on their good shot stopping keeper and numbers in the box, that's the kind of game that concerns me more than one where they're trying to play a little more, or like we saw with Ross County 2 weeks ago. So that's kind of the formula. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't bombard them to the point where we would eventually score, and maybe a couple or a few times, but again, you can see the formula as to how that could turn into a nervy game, as the 20th shot either gets blocked or goes wide, or ballooned, or Gordon saves it. So I can see that pathway.
Mm-hmm. So just as we round this chat out, I know I'm very conscious that we've already talked for 44 minutes, nearly 45 minutes. So I don't want this to turn into a 45-minute talk, because realistically we could do a full podcast on this, a full special on it. But I suppose you can't ignore the fact that Rangers are in a European final next week, or whenever the final is, 15th of May or something like that, I think it is, in Sevilla.
18th, yeah.
They're playing Eintracht Frankfurt. Look, this proves one thing, and is that the TalkSport heads don't know anything about football, considering they've been saying Scottish sides are useless and, you know, would struggle in the championship. One thing that I think you have to look at is that Celtic are 6 points clear of this side, yet they've struggled to get out of the group, and they fell in the conference, which is the European competition below where Rangers are now in the final. So it is both a success on Rangers' behalf. You have to say that getting to a Europa League final in this day and age is a huge achievement for a Scottish club based on the budgets and everything else. But from a Celtic perspective, and I've watched some of Rangers games against those teams in Europe, and I've looked at those opponents, and they are useless. They are absolutely useless. Not Rangers, the teams that they're playing against. And I'm just wondering, why do we think Celtic have fallen against these sides that on another day we might beat easily? It is a strange one, because we probably do need an answer to that question going into the Champions League now next year, because that is confirmed. If Celtic wrap up the title, they're going straight into the Champions League. So that's a step up again to where Celtic have been playing recently. So interested to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'll go back to my season-long Jenga tower analogy. So I think when it comes to competing against teams that are better than ourselves or Rangers, meaning that Rangers and us are so close in quality, it's nip and tuck, and the games have been close, relatively speaking, and the league generally has been pretty close most of the year. So I think they're built to compete better at this point. Their players fit within their system relative to playing better teams, and we've seen that with, the fact that Celtic conceded as many goals as we did. I think we averaged, basically from Alkmaar forward, we averaged 2.5 goals conceded per game, and that's including Ferencváros, who's probably a level down than the rest of them. So that was the problem, is that when we were trying to play Ange's style of football against those better teams, we just couldn't do it. And Rangers are built to be able to handle that better. And again, to their credit, that was, and if you think about the genesis from Gerrard's first season in 18-19, when they were chasing us when they had lower resources and a lower wage bill, we were that European team that had higher quality. So it made sense, right? So they started to play this way to kind of level the playing field against us. And that has extrapolated into Europe too. And as they've gotten better players, they've invested more money in their squad on the wage bill side. It's manifested in, a really impressive quality stretch for them against better teams. And for us to be able to replicate that, playing the way that we are, this is why we have to upgrade. And Ange has talked about they're going to, we'll see if we collectively agree on where that needs to be. But I think that's the big difference. To me, it's all explainable. It makes a lot of sense. And the way that we've played squeezes, that Ange style has squeezed anyone below Rangers in the league to death. That's what's allowed us to have this consistency against lower quality teams. And we get away with some of the deficiencies that we have that get massively exposed then when we play those higher quality opponents, whereas Rangers don't have quite the level of creativity, and they've had some issues at keeper with mistakes that have really impacted them in the league, and that little bit lack of creativity relative to us has hurt them domestically, but is less of an issue when they're playing on the counter and only have the ball 40% of the time, as they routinely have against the higher quality teams in the Europa League.
Yeah, we seem to have lost Alan. I think his internet just dropped out there, so we might get him back before the end of the podcast. But that's a good point in terms of the style differences, because broadly speaking, football works almost it's almost the same throughout the European leagues, at least the style of football. Most people duplicate the best brand of football that's being played. So at the minute, you've got Klopp's Liverpool and you've got Man City under Pep. You've got basically two variants of a similar system. One is extremely athletic players without the creative spark that you're talking about. That's Klopp. Now they've developed that with bringing Thiago in, bringing Luis Diaz into the team, and having Virgil van Dijk as a centre back. That's how they've counteracted that. But I feel like Steven Gerrard, while he wasn't overly successful with Rangers by that one league title, he did get a chance to develop a system that and get players in for that system that suited the system and optimized it, as you like to say, for that game plan, which works really well in European football. Fast, hungry, strong, aggressive players that basically, outwork and outmuscle the opposition in the field, but do lack that little bit of finesse. Celtic are currently in season 1 of Ange's football, which is the other side of the spectrum of high press, high intensity, creative midfield players, and working through layers of triangles throughout the entire team, sort of the Man City way because of the City group link. It's similar, not the exact same, but it's similar. But we'll be going into the Champions League in year 2. So what you can hope is that the lack of success that Celtic have had under the likes of Lennon, Rodgers to an extent, Dyla, these managers, hopefully under Ange, who is bringing in these players, seems to have an overarching responsibility for picking out the players now, with Lawwell coming in, having worked with him as well, that maybe in year 2 of Ange's football, Celtic will be optimized enough at least to win a knockout game and build on that with the money that'll come in from that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, again, to their credit, another huge distinguisher for Rangers in Europe is that they have taken their chances. They have finished very well. You saw that yesterday with Kamara's goal. I mean, that was just a really good finish. His weaker foot from distance and a little bit angled, basically one-timed. I mean, that's a really good finish. And they have had a succession of those in these games, even games where they, kind of lost the XG battle, and they might not have had a lot of chances, but they finished them. Right. So some of that's just sequencing. Some of it's randomness. You could say clutch. Some of these players came up with clutch performances, and finishing when they had that opportunity. But they haven't had that as much domestically. And some of that's because the game's open. They're not getting the ability to finish in counters like they do in Europe, whereas they face a lot of the same closed up defenses like we do in the domestic game. So, but yeah, it's the ability for us to kind of get over this boogeyman in Europe. I don't see us changing how we're playing, so it's going to require, I think, significant upgrades in a few spots, particularly now. I mean, I think the goal realistically is going to be to get third in a Champions League group, with us being pot 4, and get back into the Europa League knockout stages, and then maybe get some progression there. Would be, I think, kind of the early goal. Yeah, if we can get into the knockout stage of Champions League, all the better. But that might be a bridge a bit too far. We'll see. Depends on how much money is available and the quality of the upgrades that we make.
The group stage is going to be difficult being in pot 4. It always is, and that's the way it's set up. It's supposed to be difficult, so we'll see what happens.
We could use a lucky draw for a change. Maybe we're finally
for
due.
a change. Yeah, I tongue-in-cheek, I tweeted what I think the draw would be, and I think it had Man City, Atletico, and someone else, and then Rangers would be drawing against Zagreb and the rest of not the weak teams, because they're all strong in the Champions League, but the lesser strong teams in the Champions League. So we shall see what happens. Look, before we finish up, James, this has been a massive week in terms of news for Celtic. Like, if I had not been hungover for my own success in football last weekend, I would have been covering a lot more on the channel this week. So that's why there hasn't been too many videos. Look, we've got the Jota news seems to be progressing. According to the Portuguese media, at least, that Jota has has said he wants to stay at Celtic, and Celtic are progressing with that buyout clause of $6 million. Mark Lawwell has joined as the head of the scouting department, and just loads happening because we're at the end of the season. So your take on the last week of the Lawwell news, of the Jota news, and the rest of it?
Yeah, so I'll qualify this with saying, given some of the legacy structural issues that we've talked about, some of which have not really been addressed and probably won't be for the foreseeable future. So within that context of kind of the Ange manager-centric model that we appear to be pursuing, I think that they're positive. I've expressed my views that Jota's maybe not the optimized pick for the next couple of seasons, in my view, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to be a good signing, particularly at that price, or a productive player, or a valuable member going forward. It's more of a analytical discussion about optimization, and to everything. As an outsider with very little information, if you remove the last name of the new head of scouting and recruitment, the pedigree and the CV is there, the pre-existing relationship with Ange is there. So that seems, again, within the construct of the model that we're pursuing, seems positive. And we're doing it in a timeline that allows us to gear up. So that's the other thing. It's not late. We're gearing up for what's going to be a huge window. And fortunately, we're not going to need to sign people, June 5th or June 15th. Yeah. So, we'll have some time to deal in the marketplace and not have a, metaphorical gun to our head, not having to deal with Champions League qualifiers.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one. And that's why I mentioned trying to get the season wrapped up this weekend, if possible. We are still reliant on Rangers results, but obviously they are planning for this already. But it would be nice to take the anxiety off the rest of the season, knowing that you've already won the league. You can just start prepping for next season, and the added bonus of not having to go through those drastic Champions League qualifiers at the start of the summer window is a nice bonus as well for Celtic having that. So I think that's where we'll leave us. Unfortunately, Alan, who is in the lobby, but I just can't get him in. It's just not letting me. So I don't know if it's my connection or his connection. So I will say thank you to Alan for this week, as always. James, anything else you want to touch on before we wrap this up?
No, just maybe say thank you to Brian at NYCSC and in Midtown. It was my first trip there at the CSC. So I had a great time. Brian was a great host. True credit to the club, the people that run these CSCs, and getting up at 4:30 in the morning in the US, or even on the West Coast, people that get up at who knows what hours to get into these pubs, and the pub owners that open them up for us. I mean, it's just such a great experience. Dennis and Jack, I sat by, were great companions to watch the game. So I shared your hangover on Monday, and then at my age, it bleeds into Tuesday. So yeah, just shout out and thanks to Brian and everyone that was there.
Yeah, and I should say as well, when I'm on my travels, I'm going to Spain next week. I'll be landing in Bilbao. If there's any CSCs out there that listen to the podcast and you're in Europe, drop me a DM on Twitter and we'll see if we can arrange something. Would love to speak to a couple of you over the summer while I'm gallivanting all around Europe. So if you are an owner or part of a CSC across Europe, I'd love to meet you. And so just drop me a DM. Enda_call is my Twitter handle. So it would be great to meet you.
Just admit you're angling for free pints. Go ahead. Come on. It's so transparent.
I absolutely am. I mean, who isn't these days? Who isn't? No, I should say that as well. And some more housekeeping as well. I put a poll up on the Twitter and on the YouTube channel last week about starting a new channel. So there is going to be a new channel from me about the traveling, and I'm going to visit a few grounds. I'm going to be doing some ground hopping over the summer as well, and bringing in some football elements to a travel style YouTube. That is going to be live today. So I'm going to send out the link to that on my Twitter as well. I'll put a link in the description of this video later on as well. If you would subscribe to that, if that sounds like something you're going to be interested in, then do hit the subscribe button, and I'll stop begging you. This is the last time I'm going to ask, one and only time I'm going to ask on this channel for you to follow that other page as well. So hopefully we can get some subscribers on that. That will do us on the Huddle Breakdown. My connection, James, your connection. We
Not
thought
too
we were
bad.
going to be the problem. We thought we
Yep.
were going to be the problem, and now Alan Morrison is unfortunately not here to say goodbye for this week. We shall be back next week, hopefully. Please God, I'll be coming from the van again, but this time from Bilbao as we look back
That's the
on
first
the Hearts
step.
game.
That's the
Yeah,
first trip.
I'll be-
Bilbao. Okay.
I'll be in Bilbao reviewing this Hearts game, hopefully. So if my connection is okay there.
Safe journey, my friend. Enjoy.
Yeah, hopefully. And we shall chat to you next week. And hopefully by then Celtic will be champions. But until then, we'll chat to you later. Good luck.